Like almost any hobby, wargaming represents an opportunity to grow and develop a new set of skills. It's something that we care about, it's something that we're interested in, and so it's a natural and safe place to make those investments of time in ourselves and get to watch ourselves grow. But unlike a lot of activities that we might all try to improve in, wargaming puts one big fuzzy obstacle in our way. It's adversarial. Any wargame generally asks us to sit down and play against someone else and to play in a community. And that's a wonderful and fantastic part of the hobby, but it makes things fuzzy and complicated when trying to tell if we're improving or even figure out how to improve at all. On top of that, wargaming means being part of kind of a small community, even in the bigger wargames, with a wide skill differential. If you're just starting out, there can be so much to tackle that even figuring out how to get better, learning how to learn, can be difficult. And so in this video, we're going to talk about that. Now, what this isn't is a detailed how-to guide. The war games that we cover on this channel are complicated, nested systems of systems, and so I'm not going to be breaking down things like complicated tactical concepts or talking really specifically about mechanics, although there will be a little bit of math. Instead, this is a collection of ideas and concepts that have either worked for me or which I kind of wish someone had told me earlier that apply to getting better at all of these games that we play. Now, they won't be for everyone. Treat this kind of like a pick and mix buffet. Take the ideas that work for you and that resonate with you and discard the ones that don't. Ultimately, what we're talking about here is learning, and how you learn will be at least a little bit different from every other person. But it's my hope that there should be some stuff in here that is useful and sticks, and which you can take away and use to help yourself keep getting better at the games that we all really enjoy. And so we're going to start right at the bottom, first principles, and I'm going to say something really trite. When you're playing a war game, prioritize having fun. And yeah, that's really trite, but it's also really important, and it's important for a couple of reasons. The first and the obvious one is that, yeah, we participate in this hobby for enjoyment. If you're not enjoying yourself, and whatever that means for you, right? Does enjoyment mean being interested or engaged or tactically satisfied? Do you like stretching your brain? Do you like big and interesting moments? Whatever it is for you that's fun, look for and have that fun. Otherwise, what's the point? But kind of more importantly for this video about getting better at war games, remember, if you're having fun, you're mentally engaged. And if you're mentally engaged, you're learning more. Now, I know there'll be some teachers in the audience that are nodding along here because this is 101 stuff for them, but genuinely, play the game in a way that lets you punch those good mental buttons. Whether it's enjoyment or interest or spectacle or engagement or satisfaction, you're going to learn more productively if you're having a good time than you would if you're bored or you're tired or you're disengaged. And there's a few ways we can kind of apply this practically, right? All of the games that we cover on this channel, list construction is a thing. If you're writing lists, hey, look, it's totally okay. You have permission to play with units or regiments that you personally find cool or interesting, whether that's cool aesthetically or there's some mechanically compelling thing. Even if they aren't the most powerful regiment, your goal is to learn and to get better, especially if we're thinking about fundamental good practice and learning the game at that basic level. There is actual learning outcomes benefit to playing the cool thing that you think is cool. And in kind of a similar vein, give yourself permission from time to time to be casual. And this is specifically with regards to pushing yourself or thinking about games as training or practice. Always remember that every game, even a casual game, is one that you can learn things from. Not every game needs to be tournament or event practice. Think about when your energy is best spent on those things and what works for you. For some players, absolutely going hard on the paint all the time is something that they can do and they can enjoy. But you need to find your balance and not play in a way that makes you burn out. Because if you burn out, you get tired. If you're tired, you get bored, you get disengaged, and you don't learn as well. After a certain point, aggressive practice ceases being beneficial, and you need to actually go back and find that fun and find that engagement. And so basically all of the time, just keep in mind, are you having a good time? Are you playing in a way that is fun, that is engaging, that is satisfying, that keeps your head in the game without it having to be an effort? If you are, then you're doing things right, even if you're not winning games, because it means you're in the best possible space to learn. And On the topic of winning games, do not use winning games as a measurement for progress. In fact, in general, be positive about yourself when you're measuring progress. And this is a really important thing to communicate, right? We play in communities, we play against our friends, and your friends aren't remaining static any more than you are. Everyone that you play against is learning and trying to get better all the time. And so it's just really important to keep that in mind when you're evaluating your own performance. Win rate is almost always a terrible measurement of progress. To use an analogy, imagine that you're training for weightlifting. You might train in a community, but you do not measure yourself based on how much your good mate to your left is lifting. You want to measure yourself, how much are you lifting today against how much you lifted yesterday, or the week before, or the month before. Use that mindset. Look for improvements in yourself that are not contingent on how well all the people around you are doing. How is your rules knowledge? How is your judgment? How is your planning? How is your risk assessment? How is your execution moment to moment? Things that, to the best of your extent, you can measure compared to you yesterday, not your friends today. And just to give some examples, let's talk through some of the war games that we play on this channel and then a universal measurement that everyone can use. Firstly, for Infinity, think about your deployment. Deployment is something that you do every game, and it's one of those places where we can absolutely all make mistakes and stuff up, and those tend to become very immediately apparent. Each game, do kind of an appraisal of your deployment. Hey, how did you go in terms of making sure that a single template in the wrong place couldn't clip multiple models? How were your AROs? Did your opponent get a line with a gun that you didn't expect and you lost something, or were you broadly pretty tight in your deployment and did you only lose things you expected to lose? You can tend to assess your deployment from game to game and look for those improvements because things that go wrong in one game tend to be something you can correct in the next. In Conquest, we don't have a deployment phase, but something that's very common while you're learning the game or even just an individual army is your units getting in each other's way. Conquest is a game where moving regiments involves a lot of friction by design, right? It's a rank and flank. It's meant to not be easy to move your things around because maneuver is so important. One of the things that new players and even experienced players will have happen to them from time to time is that one regiment will get in the way of another regiment. When you are learning an army or how to play a particular list, what you'll find over time is that you get better and better at avoiding that, and then you get better and better at having everything begin to fight again in close order. So, you can go from game to game. Compared to last month, how many times this game did you have a situation where one unit got in the way of the other? If the answer is none, fantastic. Okay, cool. The next thing to improve is how many times were you able to find that units could fight in really close support with each other without having any overlap, without getting each other's way? Those are like measurable improvements and things that you can look for in each of these games that we play. Another universal measurement, and one that I actually kind of encourage for any war game, is to measure how long it takes you to play a game. And there are a couple of reasons for this. The first is that it is very, very measurable. It's just a measure of time. You contribute to about half of the time used up in every game that you play. And so if you're playing a game of Infinity and it takes 2 hours this month, but it took 2 hours and 15 minutes last month, cool. That's an actual measured improvement. Good job. And it is actually an improvement, right? Playing a game quickly means that you're making basic decisions and executing moves just a bit more quickly, just a bit more efficiently. And that's good for casual and competitive reasons. Firstly, just in terms of the fun of a game. If things proceed through more quickly, it tends to be more enjoyable. It's a smoother experience. But playing a game more quickly has very practical, competitive applications. If you're playing more quickly, it means you're making basic decisions more quickly. If you're making basic decisions more quickly and you're executing moves more quickly, you have more time in the allotted space to play around in an event to think about the thorny and novel problems. If you have a baseline of speed that you can rely on that gets you through a game with a little bit of time to spare, you have a little bit of fat on that clock in any event, competition, or even just tricky casual game to take your time where you need it and make a good decision rather than rushing one. Time is a really valuable resource, just kind of generally. And learning how to make the best use of it in a war game is something that you can measure yourself improving in and which pays really big dividends if you try and pursue it. Now, just as a note, If you're trying to train this specifically, clocks can be a very helpful tool here, but they're not for everyone. You can get a little kitchen timer for about 8 or 9 Australian dollars, and especially in a game like Infinity, you can basically math out how much time you think you should need in any given round. My recommendation is something like 15 minutes for deployment, 20 minutes for your first turn, 15 minutes for your second turn, and 10 minutes for your third turn. The reason for that being that you'll have fewer and fewer troops as the game progresses in Infinity, and so each turn should take a little bit less time. You can just set a timer when you begin each of those phases, and just keep it in your peripheral vision as you're playing. That clock counting down can have a pretty powerful psychological effect, which is part of why clocks are not for everyone, but it will give you an idea of where you need to improve or how much time you're actually taking up. Now, really to emphasize, that kind of higher pressure training is something that is only going to be suitable for some people, because the broad goal is to have fun when you're playing these games. But the general point that you want to get a little bit of practice in and try and learn to play games more quickly is an example of an improvement you can make that's not really contingent on other people, and which is measurable, and which you can be positive and generous with yourself when you're measuring that progress. Especially that feeling of getting down underneath the general event time for a game, 2 hours for Infinity, usually about 2 hours 15 minutes for Conquest. If you can find yourself getting in under that time and you weren't doing it before, big thumbs up. Fantastic. You're probably getting pretty close to being ready for tournament play, and that's awesome. Now, the next thing we have to talk about is math, and just a little bit of math. You can go deep down the rabbit hole in these games if you're really inclined to. I've gone off the deep end of learning binomial probability for Conquest, and some of the math for Infinity can be very complicated. That's not what we're talking about here. What you want is to learn just enough math to be able to kind of reasonably assess a decision in hindsight. This is things like, hey, how do the d20 probabilities work in Infinity? How do you figure out just how a broad spread of dice might result from an attack in Conquest? You've got a dice pool of d6s, you hit on a certain number. How many hits do you expect out of that dice pool? What's the over-under on that, right? If I'm rolling 10 dice and I hit on 3s, what's the broadly expected number where more than that is lucky and fewer than that is a little unlucky? And the reason why I suggest just a little bit of math is not actually really to be helpful during moment-to-moment play. Yes, knowing a little bit of math can let you make a decision in that moment, and yes, I've seen even, for example, very high-level Conquest games where two players were sitting there talking out with each other the average damage of individual attacks against models prior to sending in models on the charge to make a big clash. That can be something that's useful, but it is not why I recommend learning a little bit of math. Much more important is to be able to accurately assess your decision in hindsight after a game. And this is because of a kind of cognitive bias that we basically all have. Something that is very, very common is for us to attribute our successes to our own skill and agency and decision, and our failures to external forces like bad luck. And wow, does this apply a lot during a wargame. And this is a kind of cognitive bias that is absolutely damaging to learning outcomes. Because if you only attribute your successes to yourself and you don't attribute your failures to yourself, you can't learn from those failures. And so being able, after a game, to go back and get out a notepad or open up a calculator or whatever, and actually accurately assess whether or not you were actually unlucky after a game, helps you avoid this bias and learn more from your games. And a resource that I really recommend here, especially for Infinity, is the Infinity the Calculator calculation page, because Infinity face-to-face roll math is complicated, and I do not recommend learning how to do it. And this website lets you just plug in everything that you might need in terms of determining the outcome of a face-to-face roll, and it'll give you a breakdown of percentages and how likely doing one or more wounds were, how likely doing multiple wounds was, all of the different outcomes. It's very easy to use. It's got a super intuitive interface, and it gives you really clear outcomes and calculations, and that is really valuable because even someone with a lot of experience in Infinity, right? Like I have played enough Infinity at this point that I can probably, to within a certain level of accuracy, eyeball the percentage outcomes of any given face-to-face roll. But even I can misjudge or be surprised from time to time. Even the best competition players, people who are better than I can misjudge or be surprised. And our goal here as we're learning is to build that resource of experience, to have all of those different face-to-face roles, to have all of those fights and those clashes, and to learn which ones are good and which ones to avoid. And we can't build that experience, we can't learn from our mistakes unless we've got the mental tools to recognize when a mistake was made. And in some cases, those mental tools mean an external calculator that you can go back and check and go, oh, I should not have taken that fight. Wow, okay. I thought I was unlucky. No, actually turns out that was a terrible idea. And once you've had that experience, if you can have that experience honestly, you've just developed a piece of information that you can slot away in your brain and you can use in future. Oh, turns out fighting that linked Vistral with that model was a really bad idea. Now I know. That's the good outcome of a catastrophe and is a way more valuable outcome to you personally than either, those models are bullshit, or, I got terribly unlucky. Both of those are learning dead ends that being able to do just a little bit of math helps you avoid. And on that topic, use those moments of catastrophe. Catastrophic failure, particularly once you get reasonably okay at a game, is something that stops coming up quite as often, but it is a fantastic learning opportunity. We make so many decisions over the course of a game, so many different like micro decisions get made, different things happen, different adjustments, tiny little moves, all of these different things contribute to the broader game outcome. And it can be particularly difficult to take a strong lesson away from a game where you won or did well. But a proper catastrophe definitely means that you fucked up somehow, and that means that there's something to learn. So whenever something goes really truly tits up, when you're sitting at a table looking at the game state going, who is to blame for this situation that I find myself in? Try and think about what decision you could have made, not just in the moment, but 5, 10, 40 minutes ago during list construction, that could have changed what might have happened. Because true catastrophe very rarely materializes without a combination of three different things, all of which are useful to think about. The first is, okay, cool, what could I have done? There must have been something, right? A true stuff up, a true terrible situation usually involves at least some kind of mistake that you have made. So what is the thing that you could have done that could have affected the outcome, made it less bad, deflected the impact in some way, or mitigated the impact when it arrived? The second thing to think about is, what did your opponent do that was so good? Because almost every real catastrophe is also going to involve, in at least some capacity, something clever that your opponent did that you didn't foresee or think about. What can you do to prevent that in future, and how can you do the same thing yourself? And then finally, kind of as a distant third, consider how much dice and randomness impacted the outcome, mostly with an eye toward remembering, don't attribute your failures to bad luck without first actually thinking about how much bad luck was at play there. A proper catastrophe probably does have some bad luck involved, but you want to be pretty accurate with yourself about how much actually bad luck contributed to the outcome so that you can accurately assess what you could have done to change things and what your opponent did that was clever and how you can do the same thing yourself. In Infinity, these things come up all the time. Infinity is a fantastic game for manufacturing catastrophe. We have all had the experience where we have walked a link team across a street and your opponent has gone, hang on just a second, I have an arrow from hidden deployment. And then the Swiss Guard appears and the pain begins. And those moments can be blowouts, right? That can be it. That can be the game going straight down the toilet and you are now scrabbling to try and recover as best you can. But by God, do you have a learning experience to take away from the game after the fact. In Conquest, this is a little bit more difficult, and this is why I mention thinking about decisions you could have made actually kind of deep in the past. One of the most common mistakes in Conquest that new players make is to look at a board state right now, halfway through the game. It's turn 5 or turn 6, your flank is collapsed, you're up shit creek, and the natural response is to say something like, man, Chosen of Death are bullshit. And this might be a reasonable appraisal of any given unit's power level, but fights between regiments in Conquest don't happen without malice aforethought by multiple players. You moved your units into that position over the course of many turns. Your opponent moved their units into that position over the course of many different turns. Armies develop and deploy for fights in a way that reflects just a multitude of micro decisions, and you can impact approximately half of those in any given game. But because those decisions were made back on turn 1 or turn 2 or turn 3, it can be really easy to miss them when it's turn 5 and the round begins by some powerful regiment charging something that you didn't want charged. In Conquest, think as far back in time as you can, because there's a very high likelihood that that's where you could have affected the outcome, or your opponent made some kind of interesting or skillful play. In either case, though, Infinity, Conquest, any other game, use catastrophe as a learning opportunity, because as you get better, it does not come up as often, and it's very valuable, as much as it doesn't feel that way in the moment. And on a very related note, another thing that I advise is to actually play games all the way to the conclusion, right? Practice the late game, whether it's Infinity or Conquest or any other game. Even if you have that situation where you're like, well, cool, that terrible thing just happened. This game is lost. The Swiss Guard appeared and blew up my link team, and I don't have that many resources left anymore. My left flank is collapsed, my regiments are destroyed, my army is in disarray. This is going to be really rough now. Even in those situations, to the extent that you can, play the game through to conclusion. And the reason why is that experience generally is a resource. We build up experience over time because it's something that we can draw upon to avoid having to make decisions, every decision in the game, from first principles. Once we know broadly how to do something, broadly how to respond to a situation, that lets us save our ultimately limited mental energy for solving novel or challenging situations when they arise. If you have seen something before, you have a starting point, and so don't have to think about it all the way from first principles. This is why all practice is good. But if you're looking to develop yourself as a player, don't tap out of a game even if you think its outcome is decided, because the deeper into the game you get, the more wildly the situation begins to vary from kind of the baseline experience of play. And experiences there are by definition going to be more novel. You will be asked to solve problems with fewer or more constrained resources because your big guns are dead, because your monster is in the wrong place to affect the outcome. You'll have fewer tools, but so will your opponent. You will have deviated wildly from baseline, and so you have the opportunity to practice in a situation that is going to, by definition, come up less often. And building the experience in those wild and messy late game situations helps you try and figure your way out of the same situations, if you can, in future. Now, you might not win the game you're playing today, where a catastrophe has materialized, or even if it hasn't, but playing the game that you're playing today to at least make it as close as possible has a pretty good chance of teaching you something that can also affect a closer game in future. And if we're thinking, again, I have encouraged you not to use win rates as a measurement, but if we are thinking about your win rates in a game, and especially if we put our eye eventually toward competing in tournaments, if you play 5 rounds in 2 days, there's a pretty good chance that one of those 5 rounds will end up in some situation where it's messy and resource constrained and you're scrabbling to get over the line in the late game. Your chances of succeeding in that situation will be the best if you've had that experience in the past and you have some idea of how you might play your outs. Now, this advice, play games to conclusion, is ultimately subordinate to the rule about having fun. Especially in casual play, you are not obliged to flagellate yourself. If you've had a long week, if you're tired, if you had to review 6,000 pages of commercial tender documentation today, just to pick an example completely at random, you do not have to put yourself in a situation where you're not having a good time. But in those situations where you can have a good time and stay engaged and play to the late game, it's very valuable. And just as a piece of advice there, if you are in a situation where you think the outcome is unalterable, personally, I find that pretty difficult to proceed with. The thing to do there is to mentally adjust and set yourself some new objectives. Cool, the scenario cannot be won anymore. I cannot win this game by the definition set to me in the scenario. That's okay. What can I accomplish? What are my new objectives? Not to win the game, but how close can I make it? If I can't impact the actual score at all, well, what can I do with the things I have? What can I preserve or destroy? What is the agency that I can exercise? Being able to say, you've got me, good game, now let's see how close I can make it, can be a very good kind of mental release valve to release yourself of the obligation to play for the win because it's now out of reach, and to give yourself the opportunity to play through an experience you might otherwise not have had. And actually, kind of in a very similar vein, especially during casual play, one of the most powerful sentences you can utter is, let's just see how this goes. This is something I personally find myself saying even kind of early into some games if I think I am disadvantaged under normal circumstances. If I'm playing a game and I look at the army lists that are playing and I go, this is a tough matchup, even getting to the end game here is going to be a challenge unless I do something to disrupt the status quo. For me, that's my permission sentence. The phrase, let's see how this goes, let's see what can happen here. As the kids might say, fucking YOLO. Actually, the middle-aged people these days might say that. Open yourself up to those wildly variable experiences, because as you accumulate enough of those, when those experiences arise organically in competition play, you will be better positioned to take advantage of them and win games you might otherwise lose. And since we're talking about tournaments, we should acknowledge, firstly, that tournaments are not for everyone. But if you're watching this channel, there's a pretty good chance that you either compete or at some point would like to. And if that is your eventual goal, one of the things that's just really useful to do is to play games as casually as you would like, turn up at the club on the evening weekdays that you've got games that are being played, but play your casual games using tournament scenario rules. And this is something that will be very familiar to most of the people who are interested in most of the games that I cover, because games like Infinity and Conquest and Song of Ice and Fire actually have really good organized play systems that provide a really solid structure for different and varied scenarios and how to use terrain and how to play games, etc., that actually represent an excellent expansion of the base game. And if you're playing one of those game systems where the organized play structure is actually just excellent and a good way to play, using it naturally will prepare you better for jumping into and playing tournament play. It will be one less obstacle to overcome if you are already prepared for the scenarios you'll be playing, how the terrain tends to work, what are the competitive expectations of the game. Now, what this doesn't mean is to play your casual games like they're sweaty tournament games. Ultimately, that's a matter for you and your opponents. What you find fun should be things that you find fun. And it also doesn't mean to exclusively play only using the organized play system. If it's really good, that might be something that works very well for you, but do remember that novelty, right? Doing some things occasionally that are different or interesting, playing narrative stuff from time to time, is a useful way to broaden your experiences. You will have a few experiences playing something a little weirder and wackier that might not translate one-to-one to tournament play, but are still experiences. It's still stuffed in the back pocket that will broaden your horizon. But most good war games have a good tournament system, and so playing with it isn't just a fun way to play the game, but it gives you that bit of extra preparation for when you eventually make the step into an actual tournament. Now, this is one of these pieces of advice in this video that you really do need to find the balance that works for you. I am mostly, personally, speaking from a position of playing Infinity, Conquest, Song of Ice and Fire. All of those have robust and fun, flexible tournament systems that produce consistently interesting experiences. Not every wargame is necessarily like that. And if you play, for example, a wargame that uses always the same L-shaped terrain setup for every single tournament table, you might choose to follow this advice a bit less for the sake of novelty. This advice is subordinate to the advice about having fun and being engaged, and you should really just take it as find ways that you can to get the most out of your fun casual games so that you're getting the most interesting and applicable experiences possible. And speaking of interesting and varied experiences, the last piece of advice that I have in this video is that after a game is done and you're sitting down and you're thinking about how you've just played, ask your opponent about their experiences, because my God, a second perspective is extremely valuable. And to be very clear here, I don't just mean ask your opponent to talk about you. Seeking advice is very valuable. Do that as well. But I mean genuinely sit down and go, hey mate, that was really well played. You did really well. Tell me about that. Ask them how they felt or how they felt about the plays that they made. What were the things that they felt pressured by? When did they feel behind? Dive into their experience. Firstly, this is just kind of a nice thing to do with the people that you are sharing time with. People like to share things about themselves. It should not generally be too difficult to get a person to tell you about their experience. We are communal and sharing creatures. But beyond that, beyond the fact that it's just a nice thing to do, it is so valuable to be able to learn from other people and see the game from their perspective. Remember, you just played the same game that they did. You will have just shared that experience, but you don't have all of those same moments from their perspective until you ask them about it. And there's a really good chance that just listening to what they have to say and thinking about how you felt during those moments might teach you something that you didn't otherwise realize. Especially when they think they played well, is likely to tell you a little something about things that you could do to improve, weaknesses perhaps in your play. And when they felt pressured or when they felt behind, is probably a really good sign about when you were doing something correct. Now, don't make the conversation about yourself unless they ask you. Just invest yourself in the things that they have to say about themselves, but use that as a tool to expand your own experience and add context to all of the experiences that you've just had. And I will make the admission here that this slide, the last slide in this little presentation, definitely falls very squarely into the category of advice for myself. This entire video is an example of how I have conditioned myself, for the sake of generating YouTube content, to talk at length about my own experiences. And so it is very natural for me to sit down after a game, slot exactly into this voice that I'm using now, and talk about how I felt. And I am using this as an opportunity to remind myself that there is an entire second perspective to be had in every single game that I play, and I should avail myself of it a lot more than I currently do. So ask your opponent about their experiences, get their perspective. It is a nice thing to do, and it is incredibly valuable, and don't waste that value after a game. So that's been 7 things that I hope will be kind of useful for anyone new or experienced looking to get better at learning how to get better at these games that we play. Prioritize having fun, be positive about yourself when measuring your progress, learn just enough math to avoid cognitive biases, use catastrophe as an opportunity, play games to the late game, play games using tournament rules mostly, and ask your opponents about their experiences. Now, I'm very sure that this is not a complete list of all of the things that might be valuable to people. So if you have your own thoughts on this matter, by goodness, jump into the comments and tell people. If you've got questions, if you're looking for advice, jump into the comments as well. I'm sure there will be people around who will have things to say. I read all the comments, I will answer them myself if I can, but there's a whole community here who have interesting and valuable perspectives. If you liked this video, click like, hit subscribe, numbers go up, blah, blah, blah. You can also support the channel either by becoming a channel member on YouTube or over at Buy Me a Coffee, the link to which is in the video description. We cover Conquest, Infinity, some other war games. We publish videos about once a week, sometimes battle reports, sometimes tournament reports, sometimes faction focuses, and occasionally more esoteric topics like this. If you like this video, please do let me know, and otherwise, I hope very much that you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you next week.